Hey, I'm Larnell Lewis, and I'm so excited to introduce you to my new signature stick with ProMark. I remember seeing drummers have signature sticks at the store and saying one day I would, be able to do that. I've absolutely been thinking about this all my life, and it is a dream come true. I mean, going through the process and seeing it all, to this day, I'm still pinching myself. The journey to this stick started actually in early 2020. I had an idea in mind in terms of a stick that was really important to my playing style, really important to my needs physically. We went through 2 rounds of this stick, which is very impressive. To be able to receive a box of sticks, play as many versions of my favorite songs as I could, and just listen to how these sticks sound and tell ProMark what I needed from what was there, receive the first batch, make small modifications, and then we nailed it. So that's it, just two rounds. My prototype testing protocol looked a little something like this. Sticks would come in, I'd get to my kit, I would play a very simple kind of medium swing tempo jazz groove. And that was important, one, because I could feel the way the stick was floating in my hand. I could hear how it was affecting the ride cymbal. I'd get, a nice cross stick sound, and I was kind of like in that medium volume range. So I could play effortlessly and see how it felt. If it was smooth and I didn't have to think, on to the next thing, which was groove. So groove would be something funky, whether straight or swung, but typically in that kind of go-go, DC go-go feel. That allowed me to test drive what it felt like to dig into the drums and get more of that fundamental pitch and girth out of the drums, and especially, exciting the cymbals and moving around comfortably around the kit. The standout features for me of my signature stick are the longer taper and the larger diameter. And I needed a larger diameter because I wanted a stick that was able to give me more body, more energy out of the drums in terms of sound and depth, which this is actually 0.580 diameter. The extended taper as well made it a lot easier for me to play. So those are the 2 features I wanted to highlight. Playing these sticks, I feel nothing. And that's what I want. I want something that's in my hand but feels like an extension. Having a taper on the stick that exists, but also a larger stick, slightly larger, allows me to get really deep tones out of the drums, but also be able to play with as much finesse as I need in a split second. So having access to all that stuff is so important to the way that I play and my sound and my approach and my overall concept of music. I feel so comfortable that I just don't think anymore about the sticks being in my hands. Understanding the rebound balance concept and then taking that further into a stick that was a little bit longer, an extended taper, but still was a bigger stick that allowed me to get a lot of volume out of the drums, bring a lot of energy to the drums, but at the turn of a corner, be able to play really light and get really beautiful tones out of my cymbals and drums. But then also go to the opposite end of the spectrum for me, which was playing with a 100-piece steel band with no amplification, where I am leading this band through the arrangements, and I need to be able to have all this sound, all this energy without hurting and straining my arms. And so unplugged, outdoors, up against 100 other people, and then still be able to be quieter than the smoke coming from your latte. That was the biggest thing for me. I could get called to do any session, and in past years, I would have to bring 3 or 4 different pairs of sticks to get the tip sound that I really wanted, or to get the volume I needed because I was playing in a stadium, or something that worked with the drums and got a ton of resonance outside of my technique. And so, yeah, it's about versatility for me. The diameter of the stick is 580 or 0.580. And for me, it's actually kind of between a 5A and a 5B, which is the best of both worlds. I love the 5A, which was coming out of the Rebound 5A. But again, needing a stick that can actually bring more volume and more depth out of the drums, heading towards a 5B was also important. So, smack dab in the middle. The modified Acorn tip, for me, actually includes a slightly longer Acorn tip, slightly narrower modification, and of course, it's also a finer point. And for me, it helps with the attack on the cymbals and attack on drums, and just brings out a quality out of my cymbals that really blend well with the drums and just makes me feel a lot more comfortable about what I'm hearing. Having a longer taper was important because I wanted a stick that could float like a bird. And when I say float like a bird, I mean something that allows me to soar around the kit. And so this was, to my knowledge, the longest taper based on what we were able to do with the stick that we could get. And it really just extends that feeling of the rebound balance concept. Being able to float around the drums comfortably, have that finesse, is a big part of my playing. And so that's what we did in this stick, and it feels great. I love the fire grain concept in terms of the look of it, but also what it does to the stick. When it came to choosing the fire grain, I was playing the fire grain quite often, but really wanted to use that model to not only stand out, but also something that I believed was a stick that could take a beating. And so for me, ProMark does that, but especially with the fire grain concept, making it a little more resistant. And of course, we're in Texas, so we got a barbecue today. This is my artist signature. You cannot take this to the bank, so don't try. I wanted to have something that was really unique. For me, it was something to stand out, to have the pair of sticks, and also something quick, because if you're signing a ton of things, you want to get through. So that was the evolution of my signature. So naturally, having a signature stick, I wanted something that worked for me, that worked for my sound, that worked for what it was that I wanted to get out of the drums. Considering I've been playing all my life, I needed something that worked for me. However, it was also important to gauge my community and the people who I love and respect and just see what it was that my interpretation of a stick felt like, what it was that my interpretation of a stick sounded like. I knew I was in a good spot when I checked friends that were more into jazz, that felt comfortable playing this and felt like the sticks just kind of gave them that extra energy but didn't compromise their playing. And then of course, the other people who dig into drums but noticed that they were able to back off the sound and really control the dynamic a lot more comfortably. So yeah, I thought about me and I thought about you. I had the privilege and the honor of being able to not only walk through the ProMark factory, but to be at each of the stations and see the development of a stick. As close to the beginning of the stick's life towards the end of development of it being packaged. And to me, the process is incredibly deep. There are so many checkpoints in terms of double checking quality, making sure, everything is pitch match. The way that just the variance of grams, like the detail that goes into the process, from upstream to downstream is just incredible. And I have a great respect for a company that not only listens to artists, but listens to, their community and the people who are using the product. But to see what goes into making sure that everyone is happy with what they are investing in. And the individuals who work at these stations and the concentration and the focus and consistency that's there, it really changes. Every time I pick up a stick, and especially my stick, it really instills a massive amount of gratitude for what goes into making this possible so that I can even live my dream. When we got the final draft of the stick, I was able to tour for a month with Snarky Puppy. That was the big test. How would it feel to play night after night, on and off planes, on and off stage, in and out hotel rooms, just on a really strict schedule of travel, and then picking up the sticks wherever I was and getting down to business. And it passed the test. My first memory of ProMark was having a pair of their junior sticks. And I was maybe about 6 or 7 years old. But the reason why it's a core memory is because there was one day I was looking for them, couldn't find them, kept asking my mom for them, and it turned out my dad actually borrowed them for a gig. I grew up in a musical family. My dad is a multi-instrumentalist, mainly guitar and keyboards. My mom is a vocalist. My brother's a really well-known drummer as well, Ricky Lewis for The Weeknd. My sister also sings and plays a bit of drums. And of course, my family, my wife, Joy Laps, steel pan player, and our 2 kids, they love the drums. Here's what I recall for the ProMark sticks that I've used. Will Kennedy Signature Stick, version 1 and 2. Sidebar, the Signature Stick version 1 is what I used on the We Like It Here record with Snarky Puppy, which was my first album. The 747s, the Marco Minimans, the Todd Sickermans, the Michael Carvin, 7A, 5A, 5B, and 2B fire grains, Rebound 5As, which were the RBH 550TW at one point, Neil Peart sticks, the regular Rebound 5A, the 565s, the 580s, the Pro Rounds. Oh yeah, the 5A long, the Acid Jazz 718s. Oh my gosh. Having exposure to all the sticks that I've played from ProMark absolutely informed my decision with the Signature Stick. And so I think about the first time I connected with ProMark and having the opportunity to go through as many sticks as possible to find what allowed me to hear my drums the way I wanted to hear them and what allowed me to feel like I was inputting the necessary information into the drums that was connected to as much music as possible for me. The importance of the stick is massive, and it wasn't my first thought when I started playing drums. I can't recommend it high enough to be able to just listen to what your drums sound like with different sticks, because you might actually have the sound you want, you just gotta choose the right stick. I've gone and questioned my cymbal setup and drum setup just by the sticks I had. In fact, I ask students when they're trying out cymbals, bring a couple of different sticks so you can hear what they sound like, because you might say, I wanna sell the cymbal, but maybe you just have sticks that don't work for you or don't work for the sound, And so having a stick tip or having a stick that gives you something that you love, now you're outputting something and people can also translate that as well. We gotta talk about injuries on drums. As excited as we are to play the drums, it's very important to know how to treat your body, because we are mortal creatures and the choices we make in our daily life affect the way that we can perform on the drums. So I was very excited in my first year of college to be playing with all of these bands, hitting the scene, writing tons of songs. I'm on MSN with my girlfriend, like all of this stuff. I got tendonitis and could barely move my arms. There was so much pain everywhere. The indicator was I went to pick up a fork and I could barely hold the fork. All this stuff was happening. And so what that turned into was repeat visits with the physiotherapist and doctors, looking at people who deal with motion and understanding what it was that I was doing to my body, which was I didn't have a good diet, I wasn't resting, and I was basically treating my body like one would a car running with no oil. And so I had to revamp everything. I had to take 5 weeks off, no drumming, wasn't allowed to hold any doorknobs, any bags, handles, nothing. They were looking at speech, like recognition software if I needed to do homework assignments or anything. It was really serious. And so once I recovered, the gains were I reassessed my technique. I started to play maple sticks, which was a journey onto itself. I started looking at my setup. I started prioritizing my day in a different way. If I had a gig, I wouldn't be lifting a lot of things or doing a lot of excess stuff and just choose something else to do so I can leave enough room for myself to play. And of course, on gigs, I gave myself a rule, which was imagine that you only had 100 notes for your drum solo, which meant I had to learn to get into space and adding space in my solos. And that then encouraged me to dig deeper with my bass drum playing. So that's when I really started getting a lot faster, digging into different techniques and choosing how to shape my performance on the drums. The transition lasted a very long time. It was like 7-8 years. Once I finally got to a place where my body was good, I understood how to get tone out of the drums. I was starting to use middle finger fulcrum, which allowed me to open the stick up as a striker and bring more resonance to drums and cymbals. I regained volume, I regained speed, and I ended up with a new concept musically and sonically on the drums. So for my drum kit, I've been developing it over the years, and one of the major staples to my setup is having a second snare in the first floor tom position. And the reason why I did that is because, one, I was inspired by my big brother, Robert Sput Seawright, and having a chance to meet him, listening to his records, but also getting a chance to play, and now being a part of Snarky Puppy, it made sense to keep the low snare in this position. One quick tip is I like the way that this drum sounds within the range of the toms. So I keep it lower than my rack 2, but also higher than my second floor tom, which is really my first floor tom. And it also sits well in the overhead mics in terms of the imaging. So that's the biggest thing for me with that. And another change or concept is my cymbals. So considering short and long sounds. So from the hi-hats to my first stack to my second stack, those are, short, not as short, and a little bit longer in terms of like a shorter sound. I have my open cymbals. So I have splash, my 18 crash, 20 crash, and then 22-inch ride. And of course, I like to have something that's a little, more open. Sometimes I'll have a cymbal with rivets here. Today I have a cymbal with some, extra fixins on top. And really, I love cymbals that I can use to swell between. So I have matched crashes, and they work really well with my ride cymbal. But sometimes I do need a splash for an accent that's not too aggressive. And that's the setup. So typically with the felt on cymbals, I am usually really sensitive to how long the duration of the cymbal will last. And for the space I'm in right now, I love the way that the ride cymbal sounds without a felt, which makes it just a little bit more open. I can also make sure I clamp this down as tight as possible, the wing nut specifically, and I don't lose the resonance or sustain of the cymbal. With my setup, from my perspective, I like to be on top of the kit. I like to be thinking from like a perspective where I can play down into the kit. And it's also part setup where, because of my height, the floor tom legs may not be as long as I need them to be, or thinking about, raising my hi-hat as high as it can go, or thinking about how tall these snare stands can go. Like, a lot of that stuff plays into my setup, but most importantly, it's really about how I sit at the drums, having a slight slope of my legs, and being able to be on top of the drums and maintain a balance. So that's kind of where height of the cymbals, which are kind of almost across, and then in terms of the drums and angles, just having access to everything. Some of the things that I do to ensure that my setup is as close to, the best thing as possible is, I double check the degree angle of my legs in terms of that slope. Between my two snares, I get my pinky and my thumb, and I actually put them between the two snare drums. And the purpose of that is, one, to check distance, but also to check height. Another thing I do is I take my stick and I put it between the two rims. So if I do this and I hear, then I know that one drum is not at the right height, or I just make sure that the heights are good, which are important if I'm going from drum to drum, so I don't get a snag. Right here between my deep snare and my floor, I usually have them linked up in such a way where it creates kind of like a yin-yang, so I know that the angle of the drums are where they need to be, and positioning also works well. For my cymbals, what I typically do is I stretch out and I try to be able to touch the edges of the cymbals with my hands. And that was just a good marker to know that they weren't too close or too far. At this distance alone, if I could stretch my arm out, extend it like this, that means when the stick is in my hand, I can remain somewhat relaxed and I don't have to overextend or be too close to it. So I walk with my body everywhere, and it's helpful to be able to do these little things. And I guess in a sense, it's something that TSA can't take away from me. So I have it everywhere I go, which speaks to my comfort. All right, the magic question. What heads does Larnell use? I love the UV1 and UV2 heads. They allow me to get the best of both worlds from a coated head and a clear head, especially the UV2s. I get a lot of depth from the sound in the tuning style that I choose, a lot of resonance. The fundamental pitch really does come out in a true way and a melodic way for me using those heads. On my toms, I use UV2s, 10, 12, 16. For the bottoms, I'm using G1s. And for my main snare, I'm using a UV1. Deep snare, I'm using a hydraulic coated black. And for the snare bottoms, I'm using the Snareside 300. And for my kick, of course, I've gone through so many kick heads and I love them, but the one that gives me the most options tonally and really works with my sound is the EQ3, which I love. It's the EQ3 Clear. As a young drummer growing up, my dad always taught me to use everything as inspiration. No matter who it is, no matter what I'm doing, no matter what I'm going for, use everything. There are many influences for me, but if I were to do kind of like a hot top 5, it would be Dennis Chambers, Dave Weckl, Brian Blade, Calvin Rogers, and Terry Lynn Carrington. Their influence pushed me to look for expression, to be able to paint across the drums, to maintain the integrity of tradition. So understanding all the drummers that came before, pushing myself when it came to speed and clarity on the drums, because without clarity, you don't have music. Educating as well is a really important thing for me. The last, and of course not least, is innovation. And they're all very creative drummers and have shown throughout the years in the longevity of their careers how they've pushed the limits of drumming. When it comes to drumming and really music making, I value clarity, but I also value not only clarity of the sound on the drums, but clarity of thought. And what that looks like in a variety of ways is orchestration. What cymbals, what drums, when to play those cymbals, when to play those drums, how to play those cymbals, how to play those drums. That to me creates dimensions in the music. Listening opens things up, and so that'll make you more available to changes in terms of like how you can manipulate the music. Transitioning from drum to drum, from cymbal to cymbal, from moment to moment. Whether you're going up and down in tempo, whether you're transitioning through a volume range, a dynamic range, I think just having the control to do all of that is important. So we could categorize it as control. And of course, a concept, which again comes from listening to a bunch of records. So knowing tone, knowing tuning. I think these things, they sit across the board and are valuable if you dig into them deep enough for any drummer. I have had a chance to record music with these sticks, and it is my upcoming record that will be out called Slice of Life. That was a great feeling to be able to be working on a project of my own, which is a full expression, but then also be able to move through the music as a composer, as a drummer, and knowing that I can trust what's in my hands to allow me to express what it is that I want. Picking up a pair of ProMark sticks now, every time I pick up a stick, I see the depth of craftsmanship. I see everything from the people to the stations, and it means so much more. So yeah, it's deep. ProMark is deep for me. As a drummer, as somebody who invests time into this instrument, into a career, to have something with your name on it besides your homework is really valuable. Not only having sticks that have your name on it, but that connects to your vision and the way that you want to actually express on the drums. This is a childhood dream.